The moment my wife introduced another man as the one who truly understood her, I realized the room wasn't about to witness a celebration. It was about to uncover a truth that had been buried for 15 years. The applause came first. Polite. Measured. The kind of applause that echoed through expensive glass walls and polished marble floors because everyone in the room had learned that success deserved noise, even when sincerity was nowhere to be found. I stood near the back of the executive lounge, one hand resting around a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched. The skyline of downtown Atlanta stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun. Beneath us, traffic crawled through the streets like veins carrying the city toward another sleepless night. Tonight was supposed to celebrate a record-breaking acquisition for Carter Meridian Holdings. At least, that was what every invitation claimed. My wife, Vanessa Brooks, moved effortlessly through the crowd in a navy evening gown that caught every reflection in the room. She had always known how to own a space. Confidence wasn't something she wore. It lived inside the way she smiled, the way she shook hands, the way people instinctively stepped aside when she walked past. Watching her from a distance, I remembered the woman who once celebrated buying our first second-hand dining table with tears in her eyes. That woman seemed very far away now. She spotted me near the window and raised her hand. "There you are." Several executives turned toward me as she approached with a tall man beside her. He looked every bit the corporate success story. Perfect charcoal suit. Silver cufflinks. Relaxed smile practiced in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. "Marcus," Vanessa said brightly, slipping naturally beside him instead of beside me. "I'd like you to meet Adrian Carter." He extended his hand. "Pleasure to finally meet you." His grip was confident without being aggressive. Mine was steady. For a brief second, everything still felt ordinary. Then Vanessa laughed. "You two should finally get acquainted." She glanced toward Adrian before looking back at the surrounding guests. "You know," she said with a smile that invited everyone into the joke. "Adrian is the man who actually understands me." The laughter wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. Several people smiled knowingly. Someone raised an eyebrow. Another executive chuckled into his champagne glass. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Words don't have to be loud to cut deeply. Sometimes they only need the right audience. I felt dozens of eyes drift toward me, waiting. Waiting for embarrassment. Waiting for jealousy. Waiting for the awkward husband who didn't belong among people discussing mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I simply smiled. Then I'm glad someone keeps up with her schedule better than I do. A ripple of laughter spread through the circle. Light. Comfortable. Exactly the response everyone expected from a husband trying to save face. Vanessa gave me an approving nod, almost relieved that I hadn't created a scene. She no longer expected me to. Somewhere over the years, she had started confusing silence with weakness. The string quartet resumed playing near the center of the ballroom. Waiters floated between conversations carrying crystal glasses balanced on silver trays. Behind every polished smile, another negotiation unfolded. Numbers. Contracts. Power. The language this building understood better than love. Adrian rested a casual hand against Vanessa's shoulder while explaining something about the upcoming expansion. She leaned in as he spoke. Attentive. Interested. The expression on her face reminded me of conversations we used to have over cheap takeout boxes spread across our kitchen counter before titles and promotions became the measure of a person's worth. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger burns hot. What settled inside me felt colder. It was the quiet certainty that something fundamental had shifted long before tonight. This evening wasn't the beginning. It was simply the first time the mask had slipped in front of witnesses. As I looked around the room, I noticed framed photographs lining the far wall, images documenting 15 years of company milestones. Groundbreaking ceremonies. Ribbon cuttings. Award banquets. Magazine covers. Executives stopped occasionally to admire them before continuing their conversations. Most guests saw a history of corporate success. I saw something entirely different. Every photograph represented a decision. Every expansion rested on a signature. Every building existed because of documents that almost nobody alive had ever read. Near the main entrance, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A man in a dark suit stepped inside carrying a slim black leather portfolio secured beneath his arm. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't searching for champagne or conversation. He scanned the room once. Then his eyes found me. He gave the smallest nod. I returned it just as quietly. No one else noticed. Vanessa certainly didn't. She was too busy laughing beside the man she believed understood her better than I ever could. People like to believe they can measure a man within 30 seconds. By the cut of his suit. The watch on his wrist. The title printed beneath his name tag. Or, in my case, by the absence of all three. I watched the conversations continue as though nothing unusual had happened. Vanessa slipped effortlessly from one group of executives to another, introducing Adrian to investors from New York and board members from Chicago. Every handshake was polished. Every smile looked rehearsed. I stood alone beside the window. Not because anyone told me to. Because nobody thought to invite me into the conversation. It's remarkable how invisible a man becomes once people decide he has nothing to offer. A waiter approached carrying a silver tray filled with champagne flutes. "Champagne, sir?" I smiled politely. "Sparkling water is fine." He nodded before disappearing into the sea of expensive suits. Across the ballroom, Adrian laughed at something one of the directors had said. His confidence filled every corner of the room. He wasn't loud. Men who truly believe they belong never have to be. Vanessa rested comfortably at his side. Every now and then, she glanced toward me. Not with affection. Not even with guilt. More like someone checking to make sure a fragile piece of furniture hadn't been knocked over. I recognized that look. I'd seen it growing over the past 3 years. The concern wasn't for me. It was for appearances. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "So, you're Marcus." I turned to find a woman in her late 50s extending her hand. Natalie Hughes. Corporate counsel. Her handshake was warm. Unlike most people in the room, she looked directly into my eyes instead of over my shoulder. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. "You as well." She hesitated for half a second, almost as though she wanted to continue the conversation before someone called her name from across the room. "Excuse me." And just like that, she was gone. Interesting. Very few people inside this company knew who I was. Even fewer recognized my name. Before I could think much about it, another voice drifted toward me. "So what line of work are you in?" A young vice president I'd never met balanced a whiskey glass in one hand while studying me with polite curiosity. I answered honestly. "I invest." He nodded slowly. "Oh." That single syllable carried disappointment. No follow-up question. No curiosity. In his mind, invest translated into retirement accounts, mutual funds, maybe rental properties. Safe. Ordinary. Forgettable. He smiled politely before excusing himself to speak with someone more important. I couldn't blame him. People hear what they expect to hear. Not what you actually say. The evening continued like that. Small conversations. Short introductions. Quick assumptions. A marketing executive asked whether I enjoyed having so much free time while Vanessa traveled. Another joked that I must appreciate corporate bonuses more than anyone since I didn't have to earn them. A regional director laughed. "You picked the right woman to marry." Several people chuckled. I smiled again. I certainly did. Nobody noticed the difference between agreement and gratitude. Only one person seemed uncomfortable. Natalie. Twice I caught her looking toward me from across the ballroom before quickly looking away. Like someone carrying information she wasn't allowed to share. The string quartet shifted into a slower arrangement. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the polished floor while conversations merged into one endless hum of ambition. Atlanta's skyline faded into darkness outside. Inside, success glittered beneath golden light. Then Adrian climbed onto the small stage. He tapped the microphone. The room quieted immediately. Ladies and gentlemen. More applause. I'd like to thank everyone for believing in where this company is headed. He spoke confidently. About growth. Innovation. Leadership. Vision. Words every executive learns to repeat until they sound like scripture. Then he smiled toward Vanessa. I also want to recognize someone who has become absolutely indispensable. She laughed softly. He continued. Vanessa Brooks has been one of the brightest leaders this company has ever seen. Applause erupted again. She accepted it gracefully. My success, Adrian continued, comes from surrounding myself with people who understand the future. His eyes drifted toward Vanessa. And fortunately, I have exactly that. The audience loved it. Some even whistled. I simply watched. Years ago, compliments like those might have bothered me. Tonight they felt different. Not because they hurt less. Because they explained more. Respect doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes. One assumption at a time. One compliment given to someone else. One silence left unanswered. As Adrian stepped down from the stage, a young assistant hurried toward him carrying a tablet. She whispered something into his ear. His confident smile paused. Only for a moment. Then he nodded. Send him up. I noticed Natalie glance toward the main elevator. So did I. The doors slid open once more. The same man with the black leather portfolio stepped out into the ballroom. This time, he wasn't looking for anyone. He already knew exactly where he was going. Straight toward Adrian. And straight toward the conversation that was about to change every life in that room. There are moments when the future changes direction so quietly that nobody notices until it's already too late. The attorney didn't rush. He walked with the calm precision of someone who had spent decades carrying documents capable of making fortunes, or ending them. Every polished shoe crossed the marble floor without urgency. Without hesitation. His black leather portfolio remained tucked beneath his arm as though it weighed nothing. But I knew better. Sometimes a few sheets of paper are heavier than an empire. Adrian stepped away from the guests to greet him. Good evening, he said confidently. I wasn't expecting legal to send anyone tonight. The attorney offered a courteous smile. My apologies for interrupting your celebration, Mr. Carter. His voice carried the measured cadence of a man accustomed to boardrooms rather than courtrooms. There are a few original ownership documents that require signatures before tomorrow's transaction. Adrian accepted the explanation without another thought. Of course. He gestured toward one of the conference rooms overlooking the ballroom. We'll take care of it now. Natalie Hughes quietly joined them. So did two members of the executive committee. Nobody invited me. Nobody thought I belonged in a conversation about corporate ownership. I stayed where I was. Watching. Waiting. Not because I expected drama. Because I recognized the portfolio. I'd seen it before. 15 years earlier. Back when Carter Meridian Holdings didn't exist. Back when the company occupied a rented warehouse on the edge of Atlanta with 6 folding desks, 3 outdated computers, and a coffee machine that leaked every morning. I can still remember the smell. Fresh paint. Dust. Burnt coffee. And possibility. People often imagine successful companies beginning inside sleek offices filled with investors. They rarely begin that way. Ours certainly didn't. Back then, every paycheck was uncertain. Every contract felt like survival. I wasn't chasing wealth. I was chasing freedom. The freedom to build something no one could take away from me. During those first years, I worked 18-hour days. I negotiated with suppliers in the morning. Loaded delivery trucks in the afternoon. Balanced payroll after midnight. There were weeks I slept on the office couch because driving home would have wasted 40 precious minutes. Vanessa was there through all of it. She believed before anyone else did. When clients canceled, she reminded me why we started. When payroll came before our own rent, she smiled and said we'd figure it out. She wasn't interested in luxury. Neither was I. We were building a future. Or so I believed. Everything changed during our 5th year. Growth attracts attention. Attention attracts competitors. Competitors attract lawsuits. Most were meaningless. One wasn't. A multinational corporation claimed part of our intellectual property. The legal battle threatened to bankrupt us before we ever had a chance to defend ourselves. Our attorneys gave us one realistic option. Separate the founder from daily operations. Move ownership into a structure that couldn't be targeted as easily. Reduce visibility. Protect the company. It sounded insane. Until we realized the alternative was losing everything. I remember sitting inside a conference room not much larger than a storage closet. Stacks of legal documents covered the table. Trust agreements. Holding company registrations. Ownership transfers. Protective covenants. Every page required another signature. Another sacrifice. Another piece of the life I'd imagined. The senior attorney looked directly at me. If you do this, he warned, people will eventually forget you built this company. I laughed. I don't need credit. He leaned forward. One day, you might. I signed anyway. Page after page. Document after document. The company survived. Then it expanded. Year after year. Office after office. City after city. Until eventually, people stopped asking who founded it. They only remembered who managed it. Vanessa became the public face. She was brilliant. Confident. Charismatic. The board loved her. Clients trusted her. Reporters quoted her. I encouraged every bit of it. Success isn't always about standing in front. Sometimes it's about making sure someone you love has the chance to shine. I never imagined that one day she would begin believing the spotlight belonged only to her. The music drifting through the ballroom pulled me back to the present. Inside the conference room, the attorney opened his leather portfolio. One by one, thick folders appeared on the polished walnut table. Original documents. Blueback certificates. Embossed seals. Natalie glanced toward the ballroom. Toward me. Then back at the paperwork. For the first time all evening, Adrian's relaxed smile faded. He picked up the top document. His eyes skimmed the first page casually. Then stopped. He frowned. Lowered the paper. Read the first line again. The room beyond the glass walls continued celebrating, completely unaware that inside that conference room, a single name printed in black ink had just turned certainty into confusion. The most dangerous discoveries don't arrive with shouting. They arrive with silence. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched Adrian stare at the document as though the words had rearranged themselves while he was reading them. He blinked once. Then twice. His finger slid back to the first paragraph. Natalie remained perfectly still. The attorney folded his hands and waited. Experienced lawyers never interrupt a person discovering the truth. They let the paper do the work. Outside, the reception continued without interruption. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter drifted through the ballroom. Someone congratulated Vanessa on another successful quarter. The string quartet began playing an old jazz standard. Two completely different worlds now existed only a few feet apart. One celebrated appearances. The other was beginning to confront reality. Vanessa excused herself from a conversation with one of the investors when she noticed Adrian hadn't returned. She crossed the ballroom with her usual confidence before stepping into the conference room. I couldn't hear what she said. I didn't need to. Her smile disappeared almost immediately. Adrian handed her the document without speaking. She accepted it casually. Then her expression changed. Confusion. Disbelief. A faint wrinkle formed between her eyebrows. She looked at the first page again. Then at Adrian. Then back at the attorney. The attorney remained calm. I believe you'll want to review the ownership schedule attached behind the cover page. Vanessa turned another sheet. Then another. Her shoulders stiffened. She looked toward Natalie. Natalie simply lowered her eyes. Even from across the ballroom, I recognized the moment certainty collapsed. Because I'd lived through it before. 15 years earlier. Back when those same pages had first been placed in front of me. Most people misunderstand ownership. They think it's about having your name on a building. A parking space. A corner office. Real ownership rarely looks impressive. It's hidden inside legal language. Voting rights. Protective trusts. Irrevocable agreements. Control provisions buried beneath pages nobody bothers to read. People admire the visible parts of success. Very few understand the invisible ones. That misunderstanding had protected me for over a decade. Not because I wanted to deceive anyone. Because anonymity became the strongest shield our attorneys could build. As the company expanded, new executives arrived. Older board members retired. Departments multiplied. Entire generations of employees came and went. Every annual report listed management. Every interview highlighted leadership. Every magazine profile praised executives. Almost nobody ever asked who still owned the controlling interest. The answer had always existed. Hidden in plain sight. Locked inside documents that rarely left the firm's vault. Inside the conference room, Adrian finally looked toward the attorney. There has to be some mistake. The attorney's lips curved into the faintest professional smile. There isn't. Adrian tapped the page with his finger. This says. He stopped before finishing the sentence. Perhaps because saying my name aloud would somehow make it more real. Vanessa did it instead. Barely above a whisper. Marcus. It was the first time that evening she had spoken my name without distraction. Without impatience. Without treating me like an afterthought. The attorney nodded respectfully. Mr. Marcus Elijah Brooks remains the controlling beneficial owner under the original trust structure established 15 years ago. Silence. Heavy. Complete. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Why wasn't this disclosed? It was. The attorney's answer came without emotion. It has been disclosed in every legally required filing. Natalie finally spoke. Most executives never review the original governance documents. No accusation. Just fact. Facts have a way of sounding cruel when people have ignored them for years. Vanessa slowly closed the folder. Her hands were trembling. Not dramatically. Just enough for someone who knew her as well as I did to notice. She remembered. Or at least, pieces of those years had begun returning. The late nights. The warehouse. The endless meetings with lawyers. The months when I came home carrying cardboard boxes filled with contracts instead of groceries. Back then she had asked me whether all those legal papers really mattered. I'd smiled and told her one sentence. Someday they might save everything we've built. Neither of us imagined they would also expose everything we had lost. The attorney carefully removed one final document from the portfolio. Unlike the others, it carried blue certification tabs along the edge. This, he said quietly, is the original company deed required for tomorrow's transaction. He placed it gently on the table. No dramatic movement. No theatrical announcement. Just one sheet of paper. Adrian lowered his eyes. Vanessa followed. At the very top, centered above the legal description of the corporation's primary assets, one name appeared in bold black lettering. Marcus Elijah Brooks. Neither of them spoke. Outside the conference room, another round of applause erupted from the ballroom. Inside, the only sound was the slow, controlled breath of two people realizing they had spent years building careers inside a company whose true owner had just been standing alone beside a window, quietly watching them applaud someone else. The strange thing about respect is that it can vanish in an instant. The stranger thing is how quickly it returns when people realize you've been holding the power all along. No one came out of the conference room for nearly 5 minutes. 5 minutes isn't a long time. Unless you're standing in a ballroom where everyone is celebrating while 4 people stare at documents capable of rewriting the hierarchy of an entire company. I remained exactly where I had been all evening. Near the window. Hands loosely folded in front of me. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I simply had nowhere else I needed to be. Then the conference room door opened. Natalie stepped out first. Her expression remained composed, but something had changed. She walked directly toward me. Not toward Adrian. Not toward Vanessa. Toward me. Every conversation around us continued. Until she stopped a respectful distance away. Mr. Brooks. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The title alone caught the attention of 3 nearby executives. Mr. Brooks. Not Marcus. Not Vanessa's husband. Mr. Brooks. She inclined her head slightly. The documents are ready whenever you're available. I smiled politely. Thank you, Natalie. I'll wait inside. She turned and walked back toward the conference room. The executives nearest us exchanged puzzled glances. One whispered something under his breath. Another frowned toward the glass walls. People notice changes in status long before they understand the reason behind them. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood frozen. She was watching me. Not as her husband. As someone she suddenly realized she had never truly understood. Adrian remained inside the room, one hand pressed against the conference table as though steadying himself. For the first time since I'd met him, confidence had abandoned his face. I took a slow breath. Then crossed the ballroom. Every step felt louder than the music. Not because anyone announced my arrival. Because conversations gradually began fading on their own. Curiosity spreads faster than gossip. By the time I reached the conference room, perhaps 30 people had noticed something unusual. By the time I stepped inside, nearly everyone had. The attorney rose immediately. So good to see you again, Mr. Brooks. It's been a while. 15 years. He smiled warmly. I still remember the first time you signed these documents. So do I. He opened the folder and rotated it toward me. The original deed requires your authorization before tomorrow's transfer can proceed. I looked down at the familiar pages. The same legal language. The same embossed seals. The same signatures preserved all these years. Time changes people. Paper remembers everything. I picked up the fountain pen resting beside the document. Before signing, I glanced toward Adrian. He cleared his throat. I had no idea. I know. His voice had lost every trace of corporate polish. If I'd known. You would have treated me differently. It wasn't a question. He couldn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. He would have. Everyone in that ballroom would have. Vanessa finally found her voice. Marcus. She took one hesitant step closer. I thought. She stopped. Thought what? That I was ordinary? That I had contributed nothing? That the quiet man standing beside her at company dinners simply enjoyed the benefits of her career? Some sentences don't need to be finished. Their silence says enough. I signed the final page. One clean signature. Exactly like I had done 15 years before. The attorney carefully collected the documents. Everything is now complete. He placed them back inside the leather portfolio. Before closing it, he looked at Adrian. For tomorrow's acquisition to proceed, final approval remains subject to Mr. Brooks' written consent as controlling owner. The words echoed inside the room. Controlling owner. Outside the glass walls, several executives had begun pretending not to watch us. They failed miserably. Human beings are naturally drawn toward power. Especially when they suddenly discover they've been standing beside it all evening. I turned toward the ballroom. Every conversation had stopped. Champagne glasses remained suspended halfway to lips. Smiles had disappeared. The silence spread from one table to another until even the musicians slowly lowered their instruments. No announcement had been made. No microphone had been used. Yet somehow everyone sensed the balance inside the room had shifted. Vanessa's assistant hurried toward one of the senior vice presidents. What happened? He shook his head. I don't know. Neither did most of them. Not yet. But they soon would. Because whispers were already beginning. Did she call him Mr. Brooks? Who's the attorney? What documents? Why is Adrian standing? Did they just say owner? Questions multiplied faster than answers. I looked around the ballroom one last time. At the executives. The investors. The board members. The employees who had spent years believing influence belonged only to the people standing beneath the brightest lights. Then I smiled. Not because I had one. Because the truth no longer needed me to defend it. It had finally walked into the room on its own. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits to see who changes when the truth finally arrives. The silence inside the ballroom lingered long after I stepped out of the conference room. People suddenly remembered appointments on the other side of the room. Others pretended to check messages on their phones. No one wanted to be the first to ask what had happened. No one wanted to reveal how little they actually knew. Fear has a peculiar way of making successful people look very ordinary. I accepted another glass of sparkling water from the waiter. He smiled. This time, it wasn't the automatic smile reserved for every guest. It carried recognition. Respect spreads through a room much faster than information. Behind me, Adrian emerged from the conference room. His jacket remained perfectly pressed. His tie was still perfectly centered. Only his posture had changed. Earlier that evening he had walked like a man who owned the future. Now he walked like someone asking permission from it. He approached carefully. Marcus. I turned toward him. I owe you an apology. Several nearby conversations stopped immediately. Nobody looked directly at us. Everyone listened. I answered calmly. For what? His eyes lowered for a moment. For making assumptions. I nodded. Most people did. I should have asked more questions. You should have paid attention. He accepted the correction without argument. Because it was true. People often mistake quietness for weakness. They mistake humility for insignificance. And they mistake visibility for authority. Corporate America rewards confidence. It doesn't always reward wisdom. Adrian extended his hand. I hope this doesn't change our ability to work together. I looked at it for a second before shaking it. That depends. On what? Whether you treat people differently tomorrow than you did this morning. He understood exactly what I meant. The handshake ended. Not as friends. Not as enemies. Simply as two men who finally understood where they truly stood. Vanessa had been watching everything. Slowly, she walked toward me. The ballroom seemed to disappear around us. For years I had imagined this conversation. Sometimes in anger. Sometimes in disappointment. Now that it had arrived, I felt neither. Only clarity. She stopped a few feet away. I didn't know. Her voice barely carried beyond us. I smiled sadly. No. I forgot. Those words landed differently. Forgot. Not didn't know. Forgot. There is an enormous difference. She remembered the warehouse. The lawsuits. The trust agreements. The endless nights spent reviewing contracts together. She hadn't lost the memories. She had simply allowed newer successes to bury them. I kept telling myself, she whispered, that you were happier staying in the background. I was. She looked confused. I never wanted recognition. Then why? Because staying in the background doesn't mean disappearing. Tears gathered in her eyes. I never meant to make you feel invisible. I looked around the ballroom. At the executives suddenly avoiding eye contact. At the board members whispering among themselves. At the employees quietly watching every expression. The truth is. I paused. You didn't make me invisible. She frowned. I let you believe I was. That was the part she hadn't expected. The attorneys had warned me years ago. The company would eventually stop remembering. People would assume someone else deserved the credit. The only question had always been whether the people closest to me would remember anyway. Some had. Some hadn't. Vanessa reached toward my arm before stopping herself halfway. I'm sorry. For the first time that evening, her apology sounded completely genuine. Not because the ownership documents had changed. Because she finally understood what she had actually lost. Not power. Perspective. At that moment, the chairman of the board approached. Harold Benson had served the company since before our first $1 million contract. His hair had turned completely silver over the years. His memory had not. He smiled the moment he saw me. I wondered how long you planned to stay hidden. I laughed quietly. A little longer. Harold turned toward the executives gathering nearby. Ladies and gentlemen. Every head lifted. I believe many of you have spent years introducing yourselves to the wrong person. Several uncomfortable smiles appeared. Harold continued. When this company nearly collapsed 15 years ago, one man refused every offer to sell. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Without Marcus Brooks, none of us would be standing in this ballroom tonight. No applause followed. Not immediately. People were too busy processing what they had just heard. Then someone near the back began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the ballroom filled with applause louder than anything Adrian had received earlier that evening. I didn't bow. I didn't wave. I didn't step onto the stage. I simply stood where I had always stood. The difference was that, for the first time in years, everyone finally saw exactly who had been standing there all along. Applause has a curious sound when it arrives too late. It fills the room. But it never erases the silence that came before it. I thanked Harold with a quiet nod. He understood. He always had. Long before the company became a corporation, he had been one of the few people who valued character more than titles. The applause gradually faded. People smiled. Some looked embarrassed. Others suddenly became eager to introduce themselves again, as though we had never met. One executive hurried across the ballroom. Mr. Brooks, I don't believe we've officially met. I recognized him immediately. 3 months earlier he had interrupted me halfway through a conversation because he assumed I was waiting for Vanessa. We have. His smile froze. I suppose we have. You were busy. Color crept into his face. I'm sorry. I wasn't interested in humiliating him. I hope next time you won't be too busy to notice people. He nodded quietly before stepping away. He wasn't the last. Over the next 20 minutes, one executive after another approached. Vice presidents. Board advisors. Regional directors. Every handshake seemed warmer than the last. Every conversation lasted longer than it ever had before. Nothing about me had changed. Only their understanding of me had. That realization saddened me more than it satisfied me. Across the ballroom, Vanessa watched each interaction unfold. She knew exactly what I was thinking. Because she had once believed the same thing I did. That genuine respect should never depend on a balance sheet. Eventually she walked over again. Can we talk? I glanced toward the terrace overlooking the city skyline. Outside. The night air felt cooler than I expected. Atlanta stretched beneath us, glowing beneath thousands of lights. Years ago, those lights had inspired me. Tonight they reminded me how many dreams are built by people whose names are never remembered. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally Vanessa broke the silence. When did I start changing? It wasn't a defensive question. It was an honest one. I leaned against the railing. You didn't change overnight. She waited. It happened one promotion at a time. She closed her eyes. I became obsessed with proving I deserved everything. You did deserve your success. But you slowly convinced yourself you earned it alone. She covered her face with one hand. I hate hearing that because it's true. There was no anger left inside me. Only honesty. I admired your ambition. I know. I just wish you had remembered who stayed beside you before there was anything worth admiring. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I remember now. I believe you. She looked surprised. You do? Yes. Then why does it feel like it's too late? Because sometimes apologies arrive after trust has already packed its bags. I didn't say the words aloud. Instead I asked a different question. Do you remember our first office? She smiled through the tears. The leaking roof. And the broken heater. She laughed softly. You used to wear 2 jackets while working. And you made coffee so terrible it could strip paint. She actually laughed this time. For one brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. Not the executive. Not the public speaker. Just Vanessa. Then the laughter faded. We were happy. We were. What happened to us? I looked out across the city. We stopped measuring success the same way. Inside the ballroom, Harold had stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone gently. Ladies and gentlemen. Conversations stopped once more. I have one final announcement before we conclude tonight. Vanessa and I exchanged a glance before returning inside. The room fell completely silent. Harold smiled toward me. Tomorrow's acquisition will move forward as planned. A murmur of relief spread across the room. Then he continued. However, everyone waited. Mr. Marcus Brooks has accepted the board's request to personally address the company at tomorrow morning's executive assembly. The ballroom erupted again. Only this applause felt different. Not louder. More sincere. Because people now understood who would be speaking. Harold wasn't finished. In addition, he opened a small envelope. Mr. Brooks has also submitted one executive recommendation to be considered before tomorrow's vote. Confused whispers spread immediately. One recommendation? Only the controlling owner possessed the authority to place an item directly onto the board's agenda without prior approval. Even Adrian looked surprised. Harold unfolded the paper slowly. His eyes scanned the first line. Then he looked up. For the first time all evening, even he seemed genuinely astonished. He lowered the page slightly and stared at me. Marcus. A faint smile crossed my face. I thought it was time. Harold nodded almost imperceptibly before looking back at the room. Ladies and gentlemen. Every executive leaned forward. The first recommendation submitted by our controlling owner is not about tomorrow's acquisition. He paused just long enough for the anticipation to settle over the ballroom. It concerns the future leadership of Carter Meridian Holdings. The room expected a name. Everyone assumed they already knew which one. Harold unfolded the paper with deliberate care. The ballroom had never been quieter. Executives who negotiated billion-dollar contracts suddenly looked nervous. Investors leaned forward. Board members exchanged uncertain glances. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. One sentence had captured every eye in the room. The future leadership of Carter Meridian Holdings. Harold adjusted his glasses. The recommendation submitted by our controlling owner states. He paused. That effective after tomorrow's acquisition, the position of Chief Executive Officer shall be reviewed by the board under a full performance and governance evaluation. A wave of whispers swept through the ballroom. Reviewed. Not removed. Reviewed. One word. Yet everyone understood what it meant. No executive had ever requested a governance review of an active CEO. Only the controlling owner possessed that authority. Vanessa stood completely still. She didn't appear frightened. She appeared reflective. Perhaps she had already reached the same conclusion before Harold spoke. Leadership is not a reward. It is a responsibility renewed every day. Harold continued reading. The recommendation further states that the current Chief Executive Officer shall remain fully eligible for reappointment based solely upon demonstrated leadership, integrity, and the confidence of the board. The whispers stopped. That wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was accountability. Exactly the standard every employee in the company already lived under. Why should the CEO be different? Harold folded the paper. The vote will take place tomorrow morning. He stepped away from the microphone. No dramatic speech. No further explanation. The board understood the process. The rest of the ballroom understood the message. Nobody's position should exist beyond evaluation. Especially not the highest one. As guests slowly began leaving, several board members approached me. One of them smiled. You surprised us tonight. I wasn't trying to. No. No. I was trying to remind everyone what this company was built on. He nodded thoughtfully. Fairness. Exactly. Not loyalty. Not popularity. Not titles. Fairness. Outside, the parking lot gradually filled with departing cars. Inside, employees quietly packed decorations from the celebration that no longer felt like a celebration. Vanessa found me one final time before the evening ended. I read your recommendation. I know. You could have removed me. Yes. Why didn't you? I looked directly into her eyes. Because that's what someone else would have done. She lowered her head. You still protected me. No. I shook my head gently. I protected the company. The distinction mattered. Feelings should never determine corporate decisions. Neither should resentment. I'll accept whatever happens tomorrow. I believe you. She hesitated. Marcus. For years I kept asking myself when I lost your respect. She looked confused. I never lost respect for you. You lost faith in me. Those words struck harder than any accusation. Respect can survive disappointment. Faith rarely does. Tears returned to her eyes. I want to earn it back. I smiled sadly. Then don't start with me. She frowned. Start with yourself. Because forgiveness is never the first step. Honesty is. The ballroom was almost empty now. Only Harold remained near the stage. As I walked toward the exit, he caught up beside me. You handled tonight better than I would have. I had 15 years to think about it. He laughed. I suppose that helps. We stepped outside together. The city lights shimmered against the dark sky. You know, Harold said quietly, the board expected you to demand changes. I did. He looked surprised. I demanded every executive be evaluated under exactly the same standards. And Vanessa? Including Vanessa. He smiled. That's why this company always belonged to you. I shook my head. No. It belonged to everyone willing to protect its values. He stopped walking. Then tomorrow may become the most important board meeting we've ever held. I think you're right. As I climbed into my car, my phone vibrated. One message. From Vanessa. No long explanation. No emotional plea. Just a single sentence. Thank you for giving me the chance to earn my place instead of taking it away. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone. Some people believe victory is watching someone fall. I had learned something different. Real victory is refusing to become the person who hurt you. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of Carter Meridian Holdings headquarters. Every executive arrived earlier than usual. Every board member carried thick folders. The press had gathered outside after somehow learning that a historic governance meeting was taking place. Inside the boardroom, 21 leather chairs surrounded the polished walnut table. 20 seats slowly filled. The 21st remained empty. Mine. Because for the first time in 15 years, the man everyone had overlooked would not enter as someone's husband. He would enter as the owner whose single vote could decide not only the future of a CEO, but the future culture of the entire company. The final measure of a person is not what they own. It is what they choose to do when ownership gives them the power to destroy. The boardroom doors closed precisely at 9 o'clock. 21 chairs. 21 votes. 21 futures waiting to be decided. I entered last. Not to make an entrance. Simply because I had spent a few extra moments looking through the lobby windows at the employees arriving for work. Most of them had no idea what was happening upstairs. They trusted the people sitting around this table to protect the company they gave their lives to every day. That trust deserved better than pride. Harold called the meeting to order. The acquisition documents were approved first. Unanimously. Business continued exactly as it should. Then he reached the final item on the agenda. The governance review. Every face became serious. Vanessa sat across from me. She didn't look frightened anymore. She looked prepared. Harold turned toward her. Mrs. Brooks. She smiled gently. Vanessa is fine. He nodded. Would you like to make a statement before the vote? She stood slowly. For years she had delivered speeches to investors. Today was different. There was a time, she began quietly, when I believed leadership meant always being the strongest person in the room. She paused. I was wrong. The silence remained absolute. I forgot that leadership begins with remembering who helped build the room in the first place. Her eyes met mine. I allowed success to become louder than gratitude. No one interrupted. No one looked away. If this board believes someone else should lead this company, I will respect that decision. She took a slow breath. But whether I remain CEO or not. Her voice steadied. I will spend the rest of my career making sure no one inside this company is ever made to feel invisible again. She sat down. No applause. Boardrooms do not applaud. They listen. Harold looked toward me. Mr. Brooks. I rose. I hadn't prepared a speech. The truth rarely needs one. I've listened to every conversation since yesterday. I looked around the table. I've heard apologies. I've heard explanations. I've heard promises. I rested both hands lightly against the back of my chair. But this meeting was never about my feelings. Several directors nodded. It was about our values. I turned toward Vanessa. You made mistakes. Yes. You forgot where this company began. Yes. You allowed success to cloud your judgment. Again she answered. Yes. Then I looked around the room. So has every person sitting at this table. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared. No one denied it. The difference is, I continued. Today we have an opportunity to remember. I removed a folded document from my portfolio. I would like to withdraw my recommendation for a leadership replacement. Several directors looked surprised. Instead, I slid a different document toward Harold. This is a proposal establishing a permanent leadership accountability charter. Harold opened it carefully. Every executive officer, every board member, including the owner, would undergo an annual review focused not only on financial performance but on integrity, mentorship, employee respect, and ethical leadership. No exceptions. No protected positions. No untouchable titles. Harold smiled before he even reached the final page. This, he looked around the room, is the company we promised to build. One by one, the board members voted. Not on personalities. On principles. The charter passed unanimously. Then came the final vote. Vanessa's leadership. 21 ballots. Harold counted them twice. He looked up. The board has voted unanimously to retain Vanessa Brooks as Chief Executive Officer. Vanessa closed her eyes. One quiet tear escaped before she smiled. Not because she had one. Because she understood this wasn't a victory. It was a second chance. The meeting adjourned. Employees filled the lobby below, completely unaware that the culture of their company had just changed forever. As we walked toward the elevators, Vanessa reached for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. Not because everything had been repaired. Trust doesn't return in a single morning. But because rebuilding always begins with one honest step. Weeks later, small changes became visible everywhere. Executive offices no longer kept their doors closed. Mentorship programs expanded. Anonymous employee forums became required reading at every board meeting. Recognition was shared more generously. People greeted janitors by name. Receptionists were invited to leadership breakfasts. Managers were evaluated not only by profits but by the people they served. The company became stronger. Not because it found a better owner. Or a better CEO. Because it remembered that every great organization is built by ordinary people who deserve extraordinary respect. Sometimes I still stand quietly by the windows during company events. Most people know exactly who I am now. A few still don't. It no longer matters. Because I never wanted the room to know my name. I only wanted it to remember that the quietest person in the room may be carrying the foundation beneath everyone else's success. And if this story has taught me anything, it is this. The greatest revenge is never exposing someone's weakness. The greatest victory is building a future where no one has to hide their worth ever again.